priorities?
Good morning, Premier.
Good morning. So in the Northwest Territories, we have a much different relationship with the Indigenous bodies than I think the rest of Canada. And so I'm interested to hear from the national perspective what their concerns are. But as the Premier of the Northwest Territories, our relationship is directly with the First Nations and the Inuit and the Métis of the Northwest Territories.
National Indigenous leaders say they don't feel respected by the way this meeting is constructed. How do you respond?
I can't really speak to the construction of this meeting. I'm sorry, I apologize. This is my first Council of the Federation meeting, and so I'm interested to see how it goes. But in the Northwest Territories, we have regular bilateral meetings with Indigenous governments. We have our Council of Leaders, which every Indigenous leader in the territory is welcome to sit at, along with the cabinet ministers. And so we do things differently in the Northwest Territories. I'm interested to see how they do things across Canada.
And what are your priorities for the rest of the meetings this week?
Well, in the Northwest Territories, we have a consensus style of government, and so the priorities of our assembly are set by all of the members, all of the MLAs. And this term, we are focusing on healthcare, making sure that there's access to basic healthcare, emergency management, public safety, and of course housing, like every other jurisdiction. And as always, the economy is a big issue, and so we are really focused on making strategic infrastructure investments, and with support of the federal government and working with our provincial and territorial colleagues as well.
Have you been briefed by your security team on the assassination attempt on Donald Trump?
No, not yet.
Do you expect this to come up in the conversations?
I couldn't tell you. Zero.
What are your priorities with regards to emergency management?
Well, we've seen significant climate-driven emergencies in the Northwest Territories, and so we have issues across the board. So we are looking at better ways to mitigate potential disasters, ensuring that there's a system in place so that when there are disasters, there's compensation available, ensuring that insurance is available when that's appropriate, or the federal systems, programs are available and easily accessible by people. We have some people who are out of their homes for over 2 years now from some of the disasters we've had, and so that's not acceptable. So we need improvements to that.
The message from Premier Houston, that letter that he sent to the Prime Minister, seemed to be, stay in your lane. Is that a message that you support?
You know, we are, as a consensus style of government, we're not partisan, and so we're happy to work with anyone. And as a small territory, we are very reliant on the federal government for funding, and so I try to build good relationships with everyone, whether it's provincial premiers, territorial premiers, or the Prime Minister, or our other federal ministers.
Arctic sovereignty is also, I believe, something you guys want to talk about in the north. What is the message for premiers in the south? What do you want them to know about the threat in Canada's north?
So in the north, to ensure that we have, I guess from our perspective, we are looking at how can we ensure that the Arctic security takes into account the people that are actually in the north. And so there's been talk of multi-use infrastructure. We want to ensure that there's engagement on that, so that the infrastructure that is built is suitable, obviously, for the security purposes, which it must be, but also for the community. If it's going to be multi-use, we need to make sure that it does serve the communities.
When the government announced last week that they're going to reach that 2% of GDP target, and they have said that the Arctic is a greater priority, are you feeling optimism at this point? You have a lot of questions. Where is your head at? Well,
when the new policy was announced, I was optimistic. I was happy to see there was a focus on the north. We just need to ensure that we are involved in those conversations, and that northern companies, northern people are involved in the procurement and the building of this, because a dollar spent in the Northwest Territories goes a long way.
My last question. Sorry, go ahead. I'm just curious. There was something in Political Playbook this morning suggesting that there's like a text chain that the premiers are do you guys have a little group chat going or something like that?
I can't speak for all the premiers, but we are in contact. We all have each other's phone numbers, and so from time to time there'll be chats. I think depending on the jurisdiction, some are more closely aligned than others.
You mentioned that obviously you're newer in the job. What is the rapport like? Are you giving each other advice? You're commiserating? What happens?
Yeah, so I'm the newest member of this table, and so I've been very appreciative of the advice that the new premiers will give, and just watching to see how they carry themselves and how they deliver their message. So I'm here to learn, and they've all been very open to providing me with guidance where necessary. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bonjour.
Qu'est-ce que vous espérez entendre de vos homologues sur les demandeurs d'asile?
Bien, il y en a trop. On est rendu à 190 000 demandeurs d'asile au Québec. On n'est pas capable de leur donner les services. Ça pose un sérieux problème pour l'avenir du français à Montréal. Donc, je veux leur expliquer la situation. qui m'aide à convaincre Justin Trudeau de réduire le nombre. On demande de réduire ça de moitié. Bon, évidemment, on souhaiterait en déménager des autres provinces. Il y a des provinces qui sont ouvertes, d'autres qui ne le sont pas. Mais à la base, il faut réduire le nombre de personnes qui sont acceptées.
Donc, vous avez un travail à faire aujourd'hui pour convaincre les autres provinces d'accueillir plus de demandeurs d'asile?
Bien, j'ai commencé hier soir à leur en parler. Mais ce que je veux surtout, c'est les sensibiliser au fait que la façon de procéder de Justin Trudeau, bien, ça ne fonctionne pas. En tout cas, ça ne fonctionne pas pour le Québec parce que dans les 2 dernières années, on a reçu 50% des demandeurs d'asile du Canada, alors qu'on présente seulement 22% de la population au Canada. Donc, c'est pas possible.
Vous sentez une ouverture de la part de vos homologues? Vous sentez une ouverture de la part de vos homologues?
Bien, écoutez, je pense que j'ai réussi au moins à les sensibiliser que c'est un problème. Donc, de m'aider à dénoncer ça et à essayer de convaincre Justin Trudeau de changer l'approche. Il y a certains premiers ministres qui ont une certaine ouverture à regarder la possibilité de transférer des demandeurs d'asile chez eux, mais c'est pas simple.
Lesquels?
Parce qu'il faut surtout convaincre les demandeurs d'asile d'accepter.
Mais lesquels sont...
Je ne veux pas rentrer, c'est des conversations privées pour l'instant.
Vous rencontrez
sur
monsieur...
l'attentat du week-end contre M. Trump, vous avez réagi en ligne, mais est-ce que vous craignez que le climat politique puisse dégénérer d'une telle façon ici au Québec?
Bien, c'est inquiétant pour la démocratie aux États-Unis. Maintenant, on n'a pas ça, cette violence-là envers les politiciens au Québec, en tout cas physiquement, et il faut s'assurer que ça reste comme ça.
In English, sir,
Yeah.
how much success did you have last night speaking to the other premiers, trying to convince them to take on more asylum seekers?
But first, I want to keep private discussions private, but I think it's clear that it doesn't make sense right now. We have 190,000 asylum seekers. We cannot afford housing reason. We don't have enough teachers. We don't have enough nurses. And the future of French on the island of Montreal is in place. So we really need to first decrease this number. Of course, some are open to transfer some asylum seekers in other provinces. Some are not, because most of them are not qualified. So other provinces, they would like to have only qualified immigrants.
Où en sont les négociations sur Churchill Falls? Est-ce que vous avez rencontré M. Furey?
On va garder ça
Mais est-ce que vous avez parlé à M. Furey?
Oui, je viens de rencontrer pendant une heure Andrew Furey.
Êtes-vous déçu de voir Andrew Furey quitter le Québec? Êtes-vous déçu de voir Andrew Furey quitter le Québec?
Oui. Ben, écoutez, moi, je vais avoir des bonnes discussions avec la Caisse de dépôt là-dessus parce qu'on n'a pas été mis au courant.
Priorities for the week. That letter from Premier Houston seemed to say to the Prime Minister, stay in your lane. Federal government, get out of our lane. Do you support that?
Yeah, it's something that is coming from all premiers. It doesn't make sense. Every budget, every federal budget, we see more and more new programs in provincial jurisdictions. Enough is enough.
En français?
Merci.
Là-dessus? Sur les
Ben,
banquettements?
écoutez, je pense que c'est consensuel dans les provinces que ça n'a plus de bon sens, les nouveaux programmes fédéraux dans les champs de compétences des provinces. Ça crée des problèmes de gestion, d'efficacité, ça augmente la bureaucratie. Je pense que tout le monde est tanné de ça.
Merci, M. Legault.
Why don't you talk about your priorities for the week? There was that letter from Premier Houston. It seemed to say, sort of get off our lawn. I know that has also been your message vis-a-vis dental care. What do you think you can accomplish here on that front?
I think we all would love for the federal government to focus on its areas of jurisdiction. There's lots that they can do to build out strategic infrastructure. We've seen already in the last year problems with port strikes, with rail strikes, with airline strikes. Building those relationships, making sure that we're building more access so that we can get our products to market. I think that we share a common interest as premiers. We would really love to see them focus on those things that are economy building, productivity building, and stop trying to micromanage our affairs.
I think it can be confusing for Canadians because they see these federal programs as money for people in your jurisdiction, and perhaps it's hard to understand why you're not so interested in it.
It's pretty easy to understand. I mean, on the pharmacare program, we have a 5,000 drug plan. They wanted to have a 2-drug plan. We have a dental program that covers 500,000 people, and we're not going to roll that up for a program that's only existed for 5 minutes. This is what they do all the time, is that they offer a tiny bit of money and then make the provinces cover the lion's share of the bill. Well, we've got a program. If they want to help us, rather than duplicate administration so that more dollars actually get to people, they should be working with us rather than trying to create new programs that go against, I think, the programs we've already put in place.
Indigenous leaders are saying they only get 10 minutes to speak up there, and that's not enough. What would you say to them?
We have 2.5 hours booked with them. We're staying here until 1:30. I think in previous COP meetings, we've had a similar amount of time. So I'm looking forward to having a very long, robust conversation with them.
Premier Legault was just telling us that he wants some provinces to take more of his asylum seekers. Is that something Alberta is interested in?
I can tell you Alberta is now the destination for 22% of newcomers to Canada, even though we're only 12% of the population. So I would say that both Quebec and Alberta share an interest in having the federal government support those asylum seekers so that we can provide the social services, provide the integration, provide the language training. And I've watched that the Premier Legault has had some success in getting the federal government to meet its commitment. We would like them to meet the same commitment in Alberta.
So you'd like also to get a check from the federal government?
Look, we had 200,000 people come into Alberta last year, and 120,000 or so came from abroad. We have been the destination point for a large number of Ukrainian evacuees, and we think that the federal government should meet its responsibility as they're bringing more people in than they had committed to in the past. They're even acknowledging that we're having a housing crisis, an affordability crisis, and a crisis of pressure on all of our social programs as a result. So yes, they should be paying for the cost of that.
Are you preparing your case to, engage in talks with Ottawa about that?
Look, we have written several letters asking for, at least in our province, we have a pathway to permanent immigration, and we have asked for a larger number of provincial nominees like Quebec. Quebec, I believe, chooses 55% of their economic immigrants. We would like to have the same arrangement as Quebec, because that is the perfect model. If you have somebody who comes, they get integrated, they learn the language, they have a job, they want to stay part of the community, we should have an easier pathway for them to become permanent. And the feds have refused our request. We've been asked for it to be increased to 20,000, and they actually reduced us this year. So we're very disappointed with that. But in addition, we need more settlement dollars to make sure that people have a seamless entry into our economy.
Canada U.S. relations were already on the agenda. I'm wondering if the tone of those conversations will change at all, given obviously the tragic events over the weekend.
I think everybody's very concerned. When you see an attempted assassination and that kind of political violence, it's unacceptable. And I'm glad that we're beginning to see that they've recognized that things have gone too far. The way in which conservative politicians have been characterized is outrageous. And that is, I think, led to the culture that we've seen in the U.S. And I certainly hope that some of the progressive politicians here are careful of their language, because they've been talking about conservative politicians in the same way, and they need to dial it down.
Like what?
Have you not looked at the headlines about how Pierre Poilievre is described as dangerous? How the leader of the opposition in Alberta has described me as dangerous? When you start using that kind of rhetoric, that ends up creating an elevated risk for all of us. And I think we have to be very mindful that we can have a disagreement in politics, but we have to stick to the issues. This is what I love about this table, actually, is that we come from different political perspectives, and we're all able to get along and find areas of agreement.
You're a pretty forceful speaker yourself, Premier Smith, and I wonder if as you've asked others to take some reflection, have you had any reflection about your own rhetoric?
I always stay focused on issues and focused on finding ways that we can debate issues, and I think it should be focused on issues. I think when you start name calling and you start calling and start describing people in a way that is inappropriate and creates a dangerous environment, I think people have to be self-reflective.
Thanks, everybody.
It's PGFF.
What are your priorities heading into this meeting?
I'm really looking forward to the dialogue to have with the Indigenous organizations here. In Nunavut, we have a very strong relationship with Inuit, with the work that we do, whether it's on healthcare or whether it's on infrastructure or housing. There's really shared priorities there, so I'm really looking forward to today's conversations with the leadership here.
Shared priorities, but some of the national Indigenous leaders who are attending, like Inuit Teperi Punakami President Etienne Obed, who I know you know well, they're concerned about how premiers treat them, and they say they don't feel respected. How do you respond?
Well, we have a very strong relationship with them as a territory, and I'm really happy that the leadership is here. I think these conversations for us to have that meaningful discussion are so important. And I know the president of ITK is here this year, so we're very excited to have that, to listen to them, to actually see what we could do collaboratively together to see if we could push our joint priorities moving forward.
And what are your priorities for the rest of the week?
Just to share the importance of Arctic security. As Northern Premiers, it's important, and I think it's of national interest to see the discussion happen. And we need to see nation-building projects, whether it's a Grays Bay project where it serves as dual purpose, that serves the Navy, but also unlocks the incredible wealth potential that we have as a territory. But just from the viewpoint of Northerners, it's so important to ensure that our voices are heard around these conversations at the Council of Federations. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Happy to see you. So what are your priorities for this week, Premier?
I think it's an important time for us all to get together to talk about the state of the Federation, the future of democracy in Canada, and really looking forward to some productive discussions.
Premier Eby has voiced some interest in being part of your fight over equalization. Where does that stand?
So currently we have a court challenge. Hopefully we can have a further discussion with the federal government. It doesn't need to go to court, but again, we're firm in our proposition that the formula isn't being equally applied. It doesn't contemplate the cost to deliver services, and as a result, it doesn't reflect the spirit of what was signed in the Constitution. Hopefully we can have a broader discussion about that. That's, by the way, not to necessarily divide the pie differently, but perhaps it needs to be a different pie.
Particularly, though, I'm interested in where it stands in terms of other provinces like BC
Sure.
joining in.
Of course. So Premier Eby and I have had good conversations. Premier Smith and I have had good conversations about this. Premier Moe has already agreed to join. And I know some of the Atlantic provinces are looking at it as well, believe it or not.
You've been pushing back against the federal government. We saw Premier Eby taking some shots at the federal government. Justin Trudeau's low in the polls. It does kind of feel like you guys are kicking him in the shins a bit right now. What's the dynamic politically in this country?
Oh, that's not happening at all. I mean, we have differences of opinions on different policies. The carbon tax, I don't believe, is the instrument to achieve, by the way, the environmental imperative that it's set out to achieve. And it's not the right instrument for Newfoundland and Labrador. I can't speak to other jurisdictions, but it just does not work logically, practically, from an operational perspective in Newfoundland and Labrador. We don't see eye to eye on equalization. Well, I'm not sure his opinion on equalization, to be honest, but it is. So it's really not an attack on the Prime Minister equalization. It was Prime Minister Harper who changed the last equalization formula. So this is a question of fairness across jurisdictions, and it's one that we've taken to the court, and it's a question of how the Constitution is interpreted. We do disagree, however, on the COD in particular, and let me be clear, there is no circumstance in which foreign trawlers should be off our shore. Full stop, period. That has to be definitive. It's the Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have nursed this cod stock back from the brink. I graduated high school when the cod moratorium happened. People left in droves. The people who stayed nursed this resource back to health, and there is no world in which we can have Russian trawlers taking cod. They shouldn't be allowed to take a cheek, a fillet, or a single fish from our shores.
Would you be willing to welcome more asylum seekers as Quebec is asking?
So I had a conversation with Premier Legault about that. Newfoundland and Labrador already takes a higher number proportionally of refugees, and we'd certainly be interested in doing our fair share part as part of the Federation and helping with asylum seekers.
Can you highlight updated fires?
Still the same.
Pardon me?
Fair share means still the same. You said we've already taken up.
No, so there's the refugee allocation, which we take a higher proportion. If there was, we were happy to have a discussion with respect to our contribution in the asylum seeker file. Without question, we'll be happy to do our fair share.
The situation in the United States with the assassination attempt, just your thoughts on that level of violence and chaos?
First and foremost, my thoughts are with former President Trump and his family. There is no world in which this level of violence can be acceptable. It's important in any democracy to have differences of opinions. It's a key ingredient. It's a fundamental requirement to have differences of opinions. And it should be a robust, vigorous debate. But that cannot lead to any violent behavior. And we're obviously thinking of him, his family, and the state of democracy in general.
Have you received a security briefing since then?
I do feel safe here, yes.
Can you please provide an update on the Labrador fire?
Yeah, sure, of course, sorry. So the weather conditions remain favorable overnight. It remains at a Category 1, so we will have bombers from Newfoundland and Labrador and Quebec attacking it, one from the east side, one from the west side. We're hopeful that weather conditions will continue to be favorable. There seems to be precipitation in the forecast. The wind patterns are favorable today, so hopefully it will be another very productive day of suppression and mitigation efforts.
You spoke yesterday about evacuation and providing financial assistance.
Yep.
Are you concerned about the cost given the high rate of these climate disasters you're experiencing?
I'm concerned about the cost that is borne by the people that I saw in Goose Bay and Happy Valley Goose Bay. The fatigue that they had, the cost that they bore, both emotionally and fiscally, and I think that's the job of the province, is to be there to support them.
Can you talk about your priorities as it relates to disaster mitigation and federal support to ensure people are protected when this happens?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously mitigation is a priority of the federal government, it's a priority of Newfoundland and Labrador. We saw Fiona, we see coastal erosion. Happy to continue to work with the federal government on mitigation efforts in general. I think it's an important part. Whenever we build infrastructure now or replace infrastructure that was impacted, it's always done with the changing climate in mind.
I just wonder how the recent events regarding Trump and frankly even Biden before that, the debate performance, do you think, how does it affect the conversation you have here about Canada-U.S. relations? Does Canada need to shake up its strategy a bit?
Well, I think Canada-U.S. relations will be talked about in the state of the Federation will be talked about in the state of Canada, and its relations with the United States will be talked about here. Obviously, for every province, they're our largest trading partner. I think it's important that we understand the impact of any presidency moving forward. When you see an event, a historic event, there's no question. What happened is historic, and it will change the landscape of democracy in the United States and by extension in Canada definitively. So that will definitely feed into conversations today and the analysis of a post-assassination attempt world.
Do you think the people at the table, the 13 leaders, do you guys have a role in lowering the rhetoric that we knew and now have seen lead to things like that?
Absolutely. Political leaders, again, need to, on behalf of Canadians, have differences of opinion. They need to voice that opinion, and they need to have a robust debate, but it needs to be respectful. Personally, I've never taken that to a personal level. We've always tried to maintain a high level of debate on the content and not on the person. And that is important moving forward. I think you're seeing every political leader of any stripe on both sides of the border saying that the rhetoric really needs to become less personal, it needs to become less aggressive, and stick to the content. Canadians want and deserve a conversation about where the country is going, not about the personalities who are trying to articulate that vision.
Thank you for your time, Premier.
Thank you.